Taken all together, all the different things that we've discussed, how serious is the crisis facing the Air Force? Can you give me some sense of seriousness?
So I think the crisis is very serious, and I'll give you the fact of the matter is that when the Indian Air Force Chief goes public about it, when the Indian government makes a committee under the Defense Secretary, which prepares a report which is then kept secret and not made public, you can know that the gravity of the situation is very, very, very serious. And unless immediate action is taken in terms of providing adequate financial resources, adequate diplomatic means to procure stuff, to build up the modernization, if we could be facing a situation, whether against Pakistan or China, where when the balloon goes up, the Indian Air Force may not be really in a position to perform the kind of role that we expect it to perform.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. A recent article in Caravan magazine talks of what it calls the crisis in the Indian Air Force. And it seems this crisis has several aspects. This is clearly an issue of national importance, and yet the majority of the Indian people probably know nothing about it. Joining me now to explain the crisis and discuss its dimensions is the author of the article, a leading defense analyst, a consultant at Caravan magazine, and a lecturer at America's Yale University, Sushant Singh. Mr. Singh joins us from America. In a recent article you've written for the Caravan magazine, Sushant Singh, you talk about what you call the crisis in the Indian Air Force. That's what I want to discuss with you today. It seems to have several aspects. Let's go through many of them one by one. First, the Indian Air Force has a sanctioned strength of 42 squadrons, but it only has 31. That's 26% less than what it should have. Yet as far back as 2016, you write, Ashley Tellis assessed that the Air Force actually needs 60 squadrons. How critical is this shortfall?
So Karan, firstly, thank you for inviting me. And secondly, Karan, the shortfall is rather critical because the Indian Air Force Chief, Air Chief Marshal AP Singh, has at least twice spoken of it, hinted at it, or tried to convey the severity of the crisis. So there, as you rightly said, there are many aspects of the crisis, and the first and the foremost is the number of squadrons of fighter jets. So the Indian Air Force, as I wrote in the article, in the early 2010s, asked for 45 squadrons from the government of India to tackle a two-front threat from China and Pakistan. But it eventually was sanctioned 42.5 squadrons, and the number of squadrons over a period of time has depleted and come down to 31. Now, even out of those 31 squadrons, 2 squadrons are of MiG-21 aircraft, which I believe, or I am reliably told, are essentially just being kept to keep the numbers going. They are really not modern aircraft effective for any modern warfare. What probably they would have been number plated much earlier, but they're just being kept on to make up the numbers. Similarly, there are the Jaguar fighter jets. No other modern air force in the world, whether it is the French, the British, actually operates the Jaguar. The Indian Air Force still operates the Jaguar fighter jets. The Jaguars are not made, their spares are not made, neither by France nor by the US. And same is the state with a lot of other aircraft, barring the Rafale with 36 of them, which were bought from France by Mr. Modi, rather controversially, and the Sukhoi Su-30 aircraft, which were bought bought in the 1990s and thereafter from Russia. All the other actually aircrafts are getting dated and they've been upgraded, but they are really not top of the line stuff.
Now, in your Caravan article, you write, and I'm quoting you, India has not acquired any modern fighter jets since the controversial Rafale deal in 2015. That's 10 years ago. How unusual is that?
So that's pretty unusual, Karan. If you remember in 2018, there was a proposal raised by the Air Force, accepted by the government, that the Air Force needs at least 114 medium fighters, which is essentially a euphemism for imported fighter jets like Rafale or any other equivalent aircraft that the Indian Air Force would need. Since 2018, that proposal has not moved forward, even after the government accepted that the Air Force needed that. There's been no trials, there's been no interest being shown by anyone. There's nothing had moved at all in the last 7 years. So everybody has known that the squadron strength of the Indian Air Force is getting depleted. These projections exist with the Indian Force in great detail. These projections exist with the government of India in detail, with the Defense Ministry in detail. So it is not unusual, but for some reason, the government doesn't seem keen on buying more modern aircraft and modernizing the Indian Air Force.
Now, tell me, Sushant Singh, to what extent is this compounded by the fact that in December, China unofficially debuted two sixth-generation stealth combat jet prototypes, whilst India is still planning its fifth-generation advanced medium combat aircraft, which is only expected to be ready for service by 2035. That's 10 years from now. Doesn't that put us at a huge disadvantage?
Oh, definitely, Karan. It does put us at a huge disadvantage. And to compound the problem, the fact that the Pakistanis collaborate or rather collude with the Chinese, it actually 80% of Pakistani defense imports now are coming from China. So every time China upgrades, builds its capacities, modernizes itself, you can assume that Pakistan will indirectly benefit from it, if not directly, over a short after some time. Maybe, give it a few years and Pakistan would get the same stuff. And that should worry us even more than just China acquiring it.
In fact, you say that explicitly in your Caravan piece. You say the prospect of Pakistan acquiring China's advanced stealth fighters could dramatically shift the regional balance of power and threaten India's air superiority. Let me ask you, how likely is it that Pakistan could get access to China's advanced stealth fighters?
It is highly likely.
We have none of our own.
Yeah, it is highly likely that Pakistan could get access to it. But of course, these things take time. Pakistan needs to have money. China is not somebody which is going to gift aircraft for free to Pakistan. Pakistan needs to firstly find money to buy these things. The processes need to stabilize. So it always takes 5, 7, 10 years. But that is not that long a time frame, especially considering that India is way behind on those time frames, on those timelines.
And particularly given the fact that India won't have its own fifth generation medium combat aircraft ready for another 10 years. So by the time we reach 2035 and have our own fifth generation planes, Pakistan may well have beaten us and acquired Chinese planes in the next 5, 6 years.
Also, this has always happened with India, Karan. And India always goes and then starts looking for buying stuff off the shelf at very high rates, at very expensive prices, because you are virtually facing a crisis. And then you go and say, anyone who's willing to sell it to us, we'll buy it from them. And maybe that would eventually get repeated in a few years' time. That we would be facing an absolutely catastrophic scenario, and then we will go everywhere that we can go to, whether to Europe, whether to the US, and say, give us whatever you have, so that we can at least have some balance and some kind of equivalence with at least the Pakistani Air Force, if not the PLA Air Force.
Okay, I note what you said. In 5, 6 years' time, we could potentially face an absolutely catastrophic scenario. You mean those words, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean those words because if you're talking about a two-front collusive threat, that is what the Indian armed forces are supposed to be prepared for, both dealing with both China and Pakistan at the same time. And if you find yourself even to have that kind of conventional superiority over Pakistan, which you assume that you would have, then of course it's a catastrophic scenario. We're not even talking about China at this point. We're only talking about Pakistan in that sense.
Now, in fact, in your article, you go one step further. You say it's not just that there's a critical shortfall of fighter jets. You add, and I'm quoting you, the situation is almost as desperate in the case of critical force multipliers, such as airborne early warning and control systems, aerial refueling tankers, electronic warfare platforms and drones, as well as advanced intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets essential for extending operational reach and maintaining air superiority. To the layman, that sounds as if the Air Force lacks critical equipment. Is that in fact the case?
Yes, that is the case for the last 10 years. Numerous air chiefs in their annual press conferences and otherwise have directly and indirectly hinted at these things. Particularly, there's been a lot of conversation about AWACS, about mid-air refuelers, but for some reason, these platforms have not been procured, have not been bought, have not been inducted. Meanwhile, Pakistani Air Force has far greater number of AWACS than Indian Air Force has. We're not even talking about China here, Karan. We are only talking about Pakistan. Pakistan is a much smaller country. Please remember that India's budget for defense pensions is greater than whole of Pakistan's budget, and that country has more AWACS than what India has. Same with mid-air refuelers. For some reason, India has not bought mid-air refuelers for such a long time. That puts Air Force in a very precarious situation. If you have adequate number of mid-air refuelers, your reach, your extent to which your Air Force can operate, your fighter jets can operate, it goes up many-fold. That's because you can refuel them in the air.
Let me ask you a simple question. Many people hearing you will say this critical shortfall of equipment sounds very worrying and concerning. The simple question is this: how much of a handicap does this put the Air Force at?
So it definitely puts Air Force at a handicap. There are at least two public statements by the current Air Chief Marshal AP Singh, speaking about it, that the situation is grave. Especially when you consider the kind of technology that the Chinese are inducting, when you look at the collusive threat that comes from China and Pakistan, when you look at the numbers that are there, when you look at the slow pace of indigenous production in India, the Air Chief Marshal has constantly warned about it. So we have already reached a stage where the Indian Air Force Chief is forced to go public about the crisis, and that's all that I have said. That the crisis is so grave that the IAF Chief is going public about it, and we should at least now pay attention to this fact.
Now, as if all of this wasn't enough, Sushant Singh, you're also concerned about the shortfall in Air Force personnel. The shortage of IAF pilots in 2015 was 486. By 2021, it was almost 600. In fact, between 2016 and 2021, Air Force recruitment of pilots has fallen short between 20 and 70 trainees every single year. And you're right, this shortage is expected to persist in the future. How worrying is this shortfall of personnel?
So at this point in time, it may not be worrying because you may not have adequate number of fighter jets to actually for this shortage to be felt so adequately. But when the numbers are built and pilots take time to train, to prepare, to be operationally ready, then these numbers would actually would matter more. They would really hurt the Indian Air Force. And these numbers are not mine; these are CAG's numbers. This is the CAG report, which is in public domain, and anybody can go out and check these numbers. And the CAG says that these numbers are not unlikely to be made up even in the near future. Karan, another thing which I did not mention in the article is just not the numbers or the pilots. It's also the poor serviceability state of the equipment. We no longer know what the serviceability status is, but when you speak to retired Air Force personnel or to other senior officers, the general sense you get is that the serviceability status of most of the aircraft is in the range of 50 to 55%. That is, only 50 to 55% of your fleet is airworthy at any point in time, which makes the situation even worse than what we really believe it to be. So that's the situation we are facing. That's the crisis we are facing as of now.
Now, Sushant Singh, on the personnel front, you're also very concerned about the impact of the Agniveer scheme on the Air Force. You write, and I'm quoting you, the short tenure not only hampers the development of fully combat-ready personnel, but also creates operational handicaps as the IAF requires longer training periods to ensure proficiency in handling complex equipment and systems. How serious a setback is the Agniveer recruitment system for the Air Force?
It is definitely current both for the IAF and for the Navy because they particularly require technical manpower which can handle these complex set of machinery, this equipment. It takes time to prepare and train them. retired Air Force officers, retired naval officers, retired naval chiefs, Air Force chiefs have gone public about this fact that this puts great stress. And while it may not be felt as of now because the Agnipath scheme has only been there for last couple of years, but as we move forward in the next 5, 7, 10 years, we will feel the severe impact when these people who have already been trained go out, and these fast rotation of Agnipath, where people cannot pick up everything in 4 years and are forced to exit. 75% of them are forced to exit. The impact would be felt then.
So are you saying that very soon we will have an Air Force with inadequately trained personnel simply because they haven't had the time in service to be trained properly?
Absolutely, that's going to be the scenario if you're going to let go of 75% of your people within 4 years, especially for a very specialized technical job. You are of course going to face problems, and that's something which the Indian Air Force and the Indian Navy have constantly warned about.
So regardless of the Army's own objections and concerns about Agnipath, in the case of the Air Force, these are particularly worrying concerns.
Absolutely, and the Air Force had made it adequately clear, as General Narawane's unpublished memoirs and the extracts from those unpublished memoirs have made it amply clear. The Air Force and the Navy really took offense to his idea and said, "Why did you even propose the idea? We don't want to go with this scheme," which is as per the unpublished memoirs from which extracts were published by PTI.
Absolutely. I'll just underline that point, that those extracts published by PTI appeared maybe 2, possibly 3 years ago. For 2 or 3 years, a book that was supposed to be released imminently has simply not been published at all. That, I presume, is the reason why those concerns that he was expressing are so deeply worrying. The government has ensured those concerns do not come into the public domain at all.
Yeah, that's true. His is not the only book, Karan. I believe General N.C. Widge, who was the army chief during the early 2000s and the vice chief during the Parakram, even his memoirs, his book from that period has not been allowed to be published. I believe his book also has a very candid view of the Operation Parakram, which is the operation that was done after the terror attack on Parliament, and why it did not go off. Even that book has not been allowed to publish to be published by the government.
Let's come back to the Air Force. You make one more point about the Air Force, and it's a particularly pertinent point. You say it has consistently expressed reservations about plans to create unified theatre commands. You say this will fragment its resources and compromise its ability to execute independent air campaigns. It will also limit the IAF's flexibility and effectiveness. Can you explain this concern about unified theatre commands more fully?
So, as one air chief explained to me, and he was a serving air chief at the time, he said, for the Indian Air Force, whole of India is one single theatre. We can move from one part of India to another within a couple of hours, unlike the Army or the Navy. So for us, it is one single theatre. And if you divide our assets, which are already very few, if I only have 3 AWACS or only 31 squadrons, and if you divide them into various commands and allocate them to various commands, then my resources become very, very limited, and they may not be adequate for any of the theaters. If you give me 100 squadrons of fighter jets, of course I would be happy to divide them between 2 or 3 theaters. But if I have only 30, I would want them to keep centralized, and I would treat whole of India as one theater. That has been the Air Force's argument as to why the Integrated Theater Command, which splits their resources, which are already meager in the first place, do not work for them.
So you're saying that theatre commands do not make sense for the Air Force?
That's what the Air Force argument historically has been, and that is one of the reasons theatre commands have not seen the light of the day, and they've been trying to find a via media. The military planners and the other officials are trying to find a way in which the concerns of the Air Force can be addressed. There have been major objections from the Air Force throughout against the idea of theatre commands because of these 2 reasons: that India is one theatre by itself, and the number of assets that they have is so less that if you divide them, then they would be actually further weakened.
Now, theatre commands, presumably as a result of the Air Force pushing back, have not happened as yet. They seem to be delayed. But this remains a major, serious Air Force concern. It's something the Air Force is constantly alerting the government to.
Of course, yes, they've been publicly alerting. They've been publicly speaking about it. They've privately spoken about it. Retired Air Force officers have written about it. Some form of some other idea, some other via media would have to be found where these resources are not split and remain centralized, so that the potency of the Air Force or the ability of the Air Force to operate in various theaters is not hit.
Now, against this background, Shashank Singh, you point out that the share of GDP allocated to the defense budget has fallen to its lowest ever level in independent India, with more than half the defense spending going towards salaries and pensions. Doesn't that mean that the Modi government is squeezing defense expenditure just when it should be doing the exact opposite?
Yeah, that's true, Karan. The fact of the matter is that India's defense spending is at its lowest ever in terms of percentage of GDP, lower than what it was in 1962 when India and China fought a war. And the fact of the
Can you
matter is
repeat that again? Lower in percentage terms
percentage
than
of
it was
GDP
in
than what it was
1962.
before 1962. And the fact of the matter is that that 52% of India's defense spending goes towards salaries and pensions, which leaves very little money for modernization. Then because you also have operational expenses and other expenses, and that is why you see that the pace of modernization for all the three services has really slowed down over the years. The fact that the army could not have a modern rifle despite trying for at least last 10-12 years and was importing 90,000 weapons and giving it to only soldiers on the line of control, which is so unheard of, is due to the fact that there is an economic crunch. The fact that the Indian defense planners have to think again and again before buying something, or the fact that things get so delayed when they are buying stuff, is due to the fact that the defense budget is not adequate, especially for the kind of country that India is and the kind of challenges that it faces.
As far as the Air Force is concerned, which is our key subject and issue and focus today, how critical is the economic shortfall, the shortfall of funds?
So the buying fighters is a very expensive proposition. F-35, which President Trump offered to India, is one of the most expensive fighter jets ever produced. And if India were to buy those fighter jets, it would require a lot of money. One of the reasons I believe India bought only 36 Rafale was for the fact that it would have cost a lot of money to buy more fighter jet. Every time you buy fighter jets or submarines or any such thing, it does cost a lot of money, and that will always be a concern for a country like India, especially when the allocation for defense is so limited and so less.
And Air Force planes, I imagine, are amongst the most expensive acquisition possible. And that means that without good, worthy, fighter-capable planes, the Air Force is literally fighting with its hands tied behind its back.
Oh, absolutely, Karan. When I was at the Indian Express many years back, at the then Air Chief Marshal Dhanua gave an interview to me where he said fighting with lesser aircraft, fighter jets, lesser fighter jets, squadrons of fighter jets is like having a cricket team with only 7 players instead of 11 and going to play a cricket match. And I think that remains the best description of the situation that we have for the Indian Air Force.
Even when plans to buy jet engines, which we thought were confirmed during the Biden administration, even those plans now, you believe, are in serious doubt. The decision to acquire F-414 defense jet engines with transfer of technology from the United States, you believe, could become a victim of Donald Trump's determination to manufacture everything in the United States. You conclude, and I'm quoting you, New Delhi can now forget about this.
Absolutely. I think there were already troubles during even the Biden administration as to what kind of technology would be transferred to the HAL for manufacturing those engines in India. But under the Trump administration, it looks highly unlikely that he would allow GE to make its foremost, most modern fighter jet engine in India at HAL. I don't think that's possible, and we should not even think about it. And I think that's the reason the Indian government and Indian officials are no longer talking about it.
So this one particular deal, which was considered to be a landmark achievement when the Prime Minister visited America last year, or rather in 2023, you now believe has effectively fizzled out.
Karan, for a president who's not willing to even allow even the smallest of things, undergarments to be made in China to be imported here, or shoes to be made in Vietnam, sneakers to be made in Vietnam, can you imagine the foremost fighter jet engine being made in India? Is President Trump going to allow that? If that is the level of protectionism that he's talking about, highly unlikely. I don't think that's possible.
My last question: taken all together, all the different things that we've discussed, how serious is the crisis facing the Air Force? Can you give me some sense of seriousness?
So I think the crisis is very serious, and I'll give you the fact of the matter is that when the Indian Air Force chief goes public about it, when the Indian government makes a committee under the defense secretary, which prepares a report which is then kept secret and not made public, you can know that the gravity of the situation is very, very, very serious. And unless immediate action is taken in terms of providing adequate financial resources, adequate diplomatic means to procure stuff, to build up the modernization, if we could be facing a situation, whether against Pakistan or China, where when the balloon goes up, the Indian Air Force may not be really in a position to perform the kind of role that we expect it to perform.
Let me end by asking you how adequate or inadequate is the government's response to what you called a very, very, very serious crisis?
So as of now, they've created a committee which has produced a report, which the report has been classified as secret. So we don't know what the report contains, but we have to look at the actions. So far, we have not seen any serious action in terms of getting modern fighter jets from whether by importing them or by leasing them or through any other means. We haven't seen anything in the last couple of months, at least. Maybe we should hope that they will do something in the near future, within the coming months, within the coming financial year, so that this problem would be redressed.
So are you saying this is an inadequate response?
So far, yes. So far, this government has been in power for nearly 11 years, Karan, and in the 11 years is a long time to take steps so that the crisis should not have developed to this stage, and secondly, if and when it was developing, it should have been addressed. It needn't have come to this stage. This government can't blame its predecessors or anyone else for what the crisis in the Indian Air Force now is. After 11 years, that's not possible.
Prashant Singh, thank you very much for the time you give me. I'm particularly grateful because I know it's well past midnight in New Haven, Connecticut, from where you're joining us. Take care, sleep well, look after yourself.
Thank you so much, Karan. Thanks a lot. Pleasure talking to you as always.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.